It's easy to feel a false sense of security when it comes to cyber attacks. To the average person, cyber attacks can seem a bit abstract and, well, cyber. But the fallout from these attacks is very much real. Empty shelves, lost customers, hundreds of millions of pounds in lost profit. These are just some of the outcomes that retailers have faced recently. From the Co-operative to Marks and Spencer's, you may have heard of these attacks. They've dominated the headlines, and this effect has really been felt by customers, staff, and governments alike. Now, in both of these high-profile retail cases, one culprit's fingerprints are everywhere, a group of highly organized ransomware specialists called DragonForce.
Before we dig into DragonForce, I'd like to introduce you to a guest speaker. He's an expert in the ransomware ecosystem, Jason Rebholz. So Jason is the co-founder and CEO of Evoke Security. He leads the charge providing fractional CISO and AI security services. But importantly, for the topic of DragonForce, he spent more than a decade performing forensics investigations into complex cyber attacks, including ransomware. He now puts that expertise to work, helping organizations securely build and deploy AI. Jason, thanks a lot for being here with us.
Thanks for having me.
Could you give us a little bit of background on your history with malicious actors like DragonForce?
Yeah, so I have been fortunate or unfortunate, depending how you look at this, as riding the ransomware wave. So when I was doing investigations, I can remember starting when the first enterprise ransomware events happened. And so this goes back to a group called SamSam, where they were the first ones who went from a single system encryption to an enterprise encryption. So they would target servers in the environment. And that's when we started seeing larger and larger ransom payments. Now, that eventually evolved into ransomware as a service, where you have groups like Lockbit, where they are just providing the ransomware executables, the infrastructure behind this. And now we're to the point where we have DragonForce, where it's this first self-proclaimed cartel. And what's really interesting here and what sets them apart from these other ransomware groups is it's the first real instance where you're seeing a targeting of other ransomware groups. So what piqued my interest, I first learned about this when DragonForce went after BlackLock, and they took their systems down, they defaced the sites. And so then they started doing this with others, but really they came to fame when they went after Ransom Hub. And Ransom Hub at that time, this was back in like the February, March timeframe, they were one of the top ransomware as a service groups out there in terms of the number of victims that were getting posted to their leak site. And then overnight, DragonForce attacked their infrastructure, took them offline. And now we see a whole new kind of wave of ransomware that's starting to come out here, where we're looking at a whole different environment now. So it's really interesting in some respect, but also terrifying to kind of see where is ransomware going to go from here.
Yeah, that cartel model is crazy. It really is cartel-like behavior, gangs fighting amongst themselves. I'm so used to just dealing with ransomware as a service, insert your company name, you got hit with ransomware, the end. Some data gets stolen and it's on a data leak site. But this model where they're taking each other on, that's really interesting. I guess in some ways they're doing the world a justice. They're doing us a favor because there's less players now, but I'm sure it's just not that clean and simple.
Yeah, it's really weird because when you look at some of the language that they're using, in some sense, they're trying to create this new ecosystem where any ransomware group can come use their infrastructure and keep their own name, right? So traditionally, you would see ransomware as a service. They would be hosting their own infrastructure. It's their own little brand, right? Just like Lockbit was, just like Conti was. Like, it's a specific brand. And you have these affiliates who are the actual hackers themselves that would go and just sign up to be an affiliate there. And now DragonForce is coming out and saying, hey, we just want you to use our infrastructure and just come along. You can keep your name, just use our infrastructure. Now, there might be some things that are some positives that are available for them as a result of this. They can get some good intel. They can just focus on the executables and the infrastructure, but it's really kind of a weird play. And when you look at some of the language that they're using on their blog post, specifically around some of these recent attacks, it's very much so in kind of like just mean-spirited attacker where like they're calling out victims. So it's just really bizarre. I know they have, their hacktivist roots, but it's this weird kind of feeling right now that just doesn't fit into what we've seen with ransomware as a service groups in the past.
With ransomware as a service operators, could you clarify a little bit for our audience? What is the difference between DragonForce and Scattered Spider?
Yeah, this is interesting because when you look at a lot of the recent attacks against retailers, you hear one news report and it's saying it's Scattered Spider. You hear another news report and it's saying it's DragonForce. And so you're kind of left wondering like, well, who is it? Right. And so the answer is, well, kind of both. Right. And so if we step back and look at what the ransomware ecosystem looks like, there's really two key players here. Right. You have the ransomware as a service group. So this is what you typically hear as the ransomware variant, right? So DragonForce is this ransomware as a service. They might try to label themselves as something else, but for all intents and purposes, they are a ransomware as a service group. Now, what they do is they focus on the infrastructure needed to execute on a ransomware attack. So they're going to give you a platform where it will host your leak site. So after you steal data, and you upload that to this leak site, people can see that. They're going to provide you the builders for the ransomware executables. So, for DragonForce, they're using leaked builders that they've built upon from Lockbit and Conti. And so as anyone can go and sign up and then be in a position where they can build their ransomware executable for various platforms, whether it's Windows, Linux, or they have virtualized environments as well that you can go after. Now, the affiliates, these are the people doing the grunt work, right? So when you think of somebody that's hacking into the company, either from social engineering or some sort of external vulnerability, those are the affiliates that are doing that. And so they break into the environment, or they may even purchase access into the environment that somebody else has hacked into. And then they're going to go from that initial access to the point where they can deploy ransomware in the environment. That's the affiliate. So when we think of Scattered Spider, that is the affiliate. They're the ones that are doing the attack. Scattered Spider is then going to DragonForce, downloading that executable, encrypting systems or stealing data in the environment, and then hosting the stolen data on DragonForce's leak site. So it's this really symbiotic relationship between the two. And the reason why this has evolved to this point is because you can specialize in certain things. You no longer have to be in a position where you have to be able to write a ransomware encryptor, where you have to host your own leak site, where you have to hack into companies. The ecosystem has really matured to the point where you have specialization and people can push their own agendas forward and really focus on the things that they're good at and continue to just evolve their craft in a very narrow focus versus having to be a generalist.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the financial model behind DragonForce? Is it similar to Lockbit, the usual 80-20 model, or is it something different?
Yeah, it's fairly similar there, where they do an 80-20 split between the affiliate grabbing the 80% and the ransomware as a service group grabbing 20%. What's interesting, though, is with DragonForce, they're starting to make a call where not anyone can sign up to be part of their affiliate program anymore. And the reason for this is that these ransomware groups are getting tired of journalists and law enforcement signing up to be an affiliate and then finding ways to, siphon data from them or, eventually break into their infrastructure. And so what DragonForce is calling for now is they want to have a guarantor, so somebody that can vouch for you that is a known entity in the criminal ecosystem, or a deposit in Bitcoin, or it's actually Monero in this instance. And so it's a way that they can try to de-risk it, that not anyone is going to be able to just sign up and start collecting information. But that's one of the ways that they're starting to steer the model in a different direction.
And I guess I see a gap in the market now for someone who provides vetting services. So someone can apply, but it comes to Gary and Jason's vetting broker, and then we onboard them into the actual ecosystem. Yeah, that's kind of the way this whole thing's going, right? You're probably going to get something like that at some point. I can't imagine, filling out a Google form or sending a message on a dark web forum to join, one of these programs, and then you get the Google Meet invite, for your interview or whatever it is. That must be crazy.
Yeah, it's this balance between anonymity for cyber criminals, but also that need to make sure that you're not dealing with law enforcement. And so, you look at law enforcement and they are stepping up the disruption campaigns against these ransomware as a service groups. And quite honestly, it's pretty amazing because you have it to the point where law enforcement is trolling these groups. You have Lockbit, where they took over the leak site and they turned the leak site against them, where they started releasing information on the affiliates, on who they believe is the administrator behind Lockbit. There was a recent takedown of another group where the law enforcement used Gen AI to create a music video of the group. It's absolutely insane right now. But to your point before, do you go after the ransomware as a service group or do you go after the affiliates? And the answer is both, right? But when you look at the takedown of these ransomware as a service groups, you can have a big impact by taking one of the main players off the stage. But for the affiliates, they'll just go to somebody else, right? So look at Scattered Spider. Before, they were using AlpV as one of their ransomware as a service groups. AlpV got taken down by law enforcement, and now you start seeing Scattered Spider using DragonForce. And so it has a little bit of resilience built in, just like it would in a free market, where these affiliates can kind of go where they need to go. Now, at the same time, if you look at law enforcement activity, they arrested 4 individuals related to the attacks on M&S and Co-op, and I think Harrods as well, where 4 individuals between the ages of 17 and 20 that were based in the UK. And so you have to have both there to really make an impact. And it's kind of an impossible job to try to clean house of all these groups, right? But in my mind, it's really about how do you raise the barrier to entry or the friction that these attackers operate in, because you can't live in a world where these cyber criminals can operate without impunity. So you have to put a little bit of fear in that, and that's where I think law enforcement is doing a really good job.
Yeah, they've got a tough job as well, but I guess they're getting better with all the intel sharing that goes on at an Interpol level. That definitely helps bridge some of these gaps and speed up, cross multi-jurisdiction investigations. Because before, when it all started, it was a right headache. But I think now they've done it that much, they're getting a lot better at it. You talked about the 17 to 20-year-olds doing this stuff. That's for the 20-year-old, that's 20 to 25 in prison, right? When you get caught doing this sort of thing. Do you think that's proportionate?
I think there's a pretty big philosophical question behind that. I think unfortunately for these kids right now, they're getting sucked in at an early age when they may not know better. Right. And so you look at a lot of these kids that are in Scattered Spider and, various other groups like the COM, where, they're getting sucked into this when they're 14, 15 years old. And it's just, some of it is from the online gaming community where they kind of find a path into this. Some are just curious and they want to learn more about various things because, hacking is an interesting topic. It's like a big puzzle. I know when I got into cybersecurity, hacking was one of the ways that really I got into it, where I was really interested in it. Thankfully, I took a different path. But for these kids, when you have these online communities, that's your social structure there. That's, those are your peers. And so I think it's really kind of an unfortunate thing right now where they get sucked into it. They don't have a better option that they can see, even though plenty of options exist. And so right now, it might be that they're just being made an example out of, right? Where, it doesn't matter how old you are, you made a series of poor decisions. Because a lot of these, when it's getting to the point where you're taking down these types of companies, that's not your first time doing it, right? There's a series of steps that have to happen. And so, yeah, I think unfortunately for these kids right now, they're getting stuck in the middle of this where they're going to be made an example out of this. And so I can't say whether it's proportionate or not, but, this is where, you really got to step back and say, is this actually a crime that is not victimless, right? Or, a lot of times you think it's a faceless crime or a victimless crime. A lot of times these actors look at these companies and say, well, they have millions and millions of dollars, so what does it matter? But it's just kind of an illusion that's not really steeped in reality here, right? Like these attacks have a big impact on the companies, on individuals in the company and outside of the company. And so, I think unfortunately, you know what, they're going to get made an example out of, and they really have to recognize, these groups of kids have to recognize that, there are consequences to these actions.
So looking at one of the most prolific ransomware attacks to date, well, at least in recent memory, Marks & Spencer, the chairman of Marks & Spencer, Archie Norman, even had to appear in front of members of parliament the first week of July to discuss the attack. He revealed that the breach would likely cost the business about £300 million and a loss of operating profit, similar figure to Maersk, actually. They had to also suspend online orders for clothing lines for a period of 46 days, and click-to-collect services were suspended for even longer. Jason, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, this is something where a lot of times victims will say that it's a sophisticated cyber attack, and in most cases it's not, right? It's kind of your standard vulnerabilities that, kind of compound over time. In this case, we know that it was Scattered Spider, and we do know that Scattered Spider has some better social engineering techniques than others, right? So, it's one, they're native English speakers. They target help desks where they'll try to get password resets. They'll be able to reset MFA. And so, you can have the best security in the world on that perimeter, but if your help desk makes a mistake where they don't verify the individual, it's kind of game over there, right? So, when they're saying that the systems weren't vulnerable, they might be right because it was social engineering, but you also have to secure the human during these situations as well. The one thing that really stuck out to me though was that he said that the practice drills and the simulations was nothing like happened, and that is such a common feeling that I've seen come across every organization that I've worked with in my career doing incident response. And the reason for that is, one, you can prepare, you can go through the exercises to kind of simulate what these attacks look like. But the first time that somebody breaks into your environment, it's like somebody breaking into your house, right? You feel violated, right? It's somebody that came in, they did something potentially destructive, and now you're having to pick up the pieces. And so I would go into these conversations with these victims and say, listen, this is probably going to be one of the worst days of your career, right? It's a really tough feeling to know that your system's been taken down. And when you're losing upwards of $300 million, right, that's a very bad day. And so a lot of times, like, I've heard people experience this as an out-of-body kind of experience, and it's a lot to process, and it's a lot of stress when you're trying to get things back up and running as quickly as possible, so that, in this case, it was, 46 days of outage where they couldn't sell anything. And so that's a really difficult situation to be in.
Yeah, big time. You said a few things there reminded me of my time in the military and in different places around the world. And, you can practice bleeding, as we call it, first aid training almost, but there's fake bullets and grenades and things involved. You can do it as much as you want. It does help. And the more realistic you can make it, the better. But nothing is like the real thing. So, the team that went through this at Marks and Spencer's and the co-op, whilst it may be easy for us to say, and you might see this online as, it's terrible, they didn't patch these things, blah, blah, blah. They have been tested, all of them, because they were all involved in some way to get all this, back up and running. So, they're in a better position the next time this happens because they've all done it. And, I haven't done it. I've never recovered from a ransomware attack, thankfully. So, yeah. What can we expect sort of from, Marks and Spencer's and Co-op, going forward? Obviously they've lost the revenue. Are there any other impacts that we aren't thinking about other than revenue?
Well, even on the revenue side, there's still cyber insurance, right? And so this was something that the chairman had made a comment about, where he said, "Hey, like we lost or potentially going to lose 300 million. Some of that might be offset by insurance." And so, which is accurate. It's all going to come down to how much insurance that they bought and the type that they bought. And so in cyber insurance, there's this concept of business interruption. So if your systems go offline due to a cyber attack, depending on the policy that you bought, you might be able to recoup some of that lost revenue. And so I think that's the angle where the chairman was coming into this, saying, hey, like, we might be able to get something back from that. Now, it's not going to be all 300 million, but that can really help you address some of the financial losses. And that's why, I always advocate for getting cyber insurance, because it can help pay for the investigation. It can help pay for the recovery services. And in this type of situation, if you have the right coverage, it can help offset some of the revenue loss that you may have experienced because of these ransomware attacks. And so from the financial standpoint, you don't have to operate where it's going to be a total loss. You just have to have the foresight to purchase cyber insurance ahead of time.
Yeah, it'll be an interesting conversation now, won't it? If I was the CISO at M&S and I said, right, team, we've just lost 300 million. I don't know how much cyber insurance is, but I need 10 million to buy cyber insurance that covers us for 150 million. Those figures, like how they talk through that and calibrate it, those conversations would be fascinating to sit in on. Because, just because it happened before doesn't mean it's going to happen again. And equally, now that you've patched all your systems and you're back, that also doesn't mean that you're secure. You could still be insecure. So it's a nightmare of a thing. And that's one of the things, I like about physical security is there's a door and there's two bodyguards. They're armed to the teeth. There's cameras and the door's locked with a big time code on it. To me, that feels stronger than some of the cyber stuff, but maybe that's because, you and I are so close to cyber. We see people get popped all day, every day, practically. On the co-op side of things, they've partnered with the hacking games. What do you think about that? Like, do you think that helps?
I think that there's a good PR story to be had here, especially with the fact that you're dealing with Scattered Spider. That was the one that attacked them, right? I think they partnered with them just before it became public that the perpetrators behind that attack were between 17 years old and 20 years old. And so, this is something where, going back to that conversation before around the age of these hackers and having to try to intercept this early, I think it's an amazing thing to try to push, because when these kids are getting online and they're getting sucked into these gaming communities that potentially lead to these cyber, kind of hacking type of forums and communities as well, a lot of these kids don't know that you can have a career in cybersecurity. And so I think it's amazing to try to get in there early enough and educate them on other paths they can take that don't involve going down this route of hacking into other companies and trying to steal money. And so, yeah, I think it's awesome. Is it going to help them particularly in the future? Maybe not. Is it going to help the world? Yeah, it's got a good chance of that. And so I think it's pretty cool that we're seeing more investment go into that. And I think for that particular group, it's awesome that they're really trying to tackle this where they can help these kids earlier in their lives.
So what's your take on cyber impacting reputation? When does it? When doesn't it?
I think for the majority of these companies, what I've seen is that they might take a short-term impact in terms of reputation, but people have their favorite stores. And, at this point, cyber attacks are, they feel like they're a dime a dozen at this point, right? Every day, it seems like there's another victim that's getting posted. There's another headline that comes up, big headlines that come up at least, every few weeks, if not, every month or so. And so I think people are just becoming used to it. And so the reputational hit, it would have to be something really, really bad for that reputation hit to really kind of cement itself. But I've looked at stock market performance after these major events as well. And, you'll normally see a short-term dip, but they usually come back stronger than ever. And a good example of this is CrowdStrike. Not a cyber attack, but when they took down, literally the internet because of their faulty software update, their stock tanked. And that was probably, maybe arguably one of the worst PR nightmares for a security company, a cybersecurity company. Like you're not supposed to take down all these systems, and their stock is stronger than ever, right? And so people have their favorites. They get used to things. So I think, that reputational loss, short-term hit. You might lose a couple customers here or there, the ones that maybe are a little bit more paranoid or whatever it might be, but. Outside of a short-term financial impact, for these larger companies, it's not that big of a deal. Now, smaller companies may be a different story, right? I've definitely seen reports of companies going out of business because they couldn't recover from a ransomware attack. And so it's a little bit of an uneven playing field in that regard.
So when these breaches happen and customer data gets stolen, is there anything that the general public can actually do or should do to protect themselves?
Yeah, so the first part is what data was potentially stolen there, right? And hopefully the company is doing notifications to these victims that the data was included in so that they can take the right measures. Now, for me, one of the things that I've always seen is that a lot of times they're going to give you free credit monitoring, right? I have been riding the free credit monitoring wave from breaches for the last 15 years at this point, right? But that's not enough to protect me. So, one thing that I always recommend to people is that you should just freeze your credit. Now, in the States, there are 3 major credit unions that you would work with to freeze your credit. And it's not 100% effective, right? But if somebody is trying to steal your identity and say, take out a loan in your name or whatever it might be, that could be a proactive defense against stopping them. Outside of that, right, it comes down to just the basics of cybersecurity, right? So I don't care who you are, right, whether you're technical or not. What I always recommend to everybody is use a password manager so that you have unique passwords on every single site. Don't reuse your passwords. And 2, set up multi-factor authentication for any website that allows it, right? And there's this new technology, passkeys, that's starting to gain adoption. It's easier to use. You can use it with your password manager. And that is something that is very secure against people trying to steal your account information, your username and password, and then trying to log in as you. So password manager, MFA, credit locks, that's the thing that anyone can do today to really help put themselves in a position to protect their online identities moving forward.
Well, Jason, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks a lot for joining us and for your insightful comments.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Cheers. See you next time. Your data is valuable and it's under attack. Cyber espionage groups, financially motivated threat actors, ransomware attackers, and other criminal enterprises are on the rise. Working in secrecy to dismantle security perimeters, they spread like a virus through the web, stoking geopolitical tensions, holding businesses to ransom, and flooding criminal marketplaces with sensitive information. These groups thrive in secrecy, now more than ever. Knowing who your adversaries are is critical. So join us as we ask who's behind the world's most prolific cybercriminal groups. What are their tactics, their motivations, and their impact? Who are the world's masked actors? Masked Actors is an independent podcast from Group IB, a leading voice in the fight against cybercrime. The threat landscape evolves quickly, but all information was correct at the time of recording and based on Group IB's High-Tech Crime Trends Report 2025. Join in the conversation online using the hashtag #MaskedActors. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Thanks for listening. See you next time as we uncover more of the world's top masked actors.